How are you doing, everybody? Welcome into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and here we have our recap and takeaways episode from Week 13 Fantasy Football, where I break down 10 of my takeaways from this weekend's games here. Obviously, we still have the Monday slate to go, but Thursday and Sunday are in the books, so we're going to synthesize that information, 10 of our biggest takeaways, send it right back towards you guys, and then head into Week 14 Fantasy Football here, which is potentially your last opportunity at a playoff push here. You're finalizing the standings. This is a big week, so we've got a lot at stake, a lot on the line. We got to be locked in, dialed in here, and ready to go for this weekend's huge matchup. So, as always, if you're new around here, it means a ton to me. If you head on down, smash that subscribe button. If you're new around here, I'm posting multiple fantasy posts here per day, most of the days of the week here. So make sure to stay tuned for that stuff. Check those videos out as they drop here. And with that said, let's jump right on into my first takeaway here from Week 13. Alrighty, here we go. So a bit of a different and interesting takeaway to start out today's video. I was kind of scraping the bottom of the well looking for some unique stuff to talk about and figured I'd lead off with this for today's episode. But the New England Patriots are a defense that is currently ranked number 1 in scoring for fantasy football defenses based on ESPN's standard defensive scorings. And I'm getting the impression here, and I've kind of been on this for a couple of weeks now, but this is the first time I'm really publicly relaying this to you guys. I've been talking through it with some of our subscribers in the community Discord server on our gold membership plan. But essentially, the Patriots defense is one and such that I think I'll be fading here down the stretch of the season as the games get more meaningful and as play obviously ramps up here. These guys have a brutal closing schedule, and they've already kind of started experiencing the tip of the iceberg here. So in the past 2 weeks, they've scored 4 total points. They had 1 point at Minnesota, a strong offense on Thanksgiving. They had 3 points the following Thursday against Buffalo here. Then they're at Arizona and at Las Vegas. I would argue that weeks 14 and 15 are their easiest 2 remaining games in the schedule here before they face Cincinnati, Miami, and are at Buffalo in Orchard Park to finish out the season. It's nothing against Bill Belichick, and it's nothing against the Patriots defense here. They're just playing high-caliber offenses with a whole lot of playmakers. Even the Raiders, for goodness sake here, have Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams going absolutely ballistic every single game. The Cardinals have Hopkins. They've got Murray. They've got Hollywood Brown. They've got James Conner. They've got their own playmakers of sorts that can do some dents and damage here. So in terms of the amount of takeaways and sacks they'll be getting in these games, I'm expecting those numbers to regress a little bit here. The points allowed, ramping that up a little bit. And, you know, the discrepancy between the two, meaning negative things for your fantasy lineups here. It's not that I won't have these guys as a top 12 or 14 defense, so those of you in deeper leagues, even 10-team formats, won't be able to start them here. But I do think that in, you know, the vacuum of an individual week, there may be better streaming options, and that's kind of where we're going here with this takeaway. Next up here, man, if I had only waited 1 more week. It seemed that everyone except for me in the fantasy community had written off DeAndre Swift. Everyone. It was the Jamal Williams hype train. It was moving on to bigger and better things, the scrimmage touchdown leader of the National Football League. And just when I had finally fallen on my sword for the last time and had written DeAndre Swift off, the man, you know, does the old Undertaker, sits up out of his grave, and comes back and is a top-level fantasy finisher from this week. He was out there. I don't have the official snap count percentages yet, but it looked like he was out there a significantly larger portion of times than the minimal 30-ish percentile he's been stuck in for the last handful of games here. He looked explosive in the passing game. He had over 100 yards from scrimmage. He had 49 receiving yards. He had 62 rushing yards on 14 attempts, over 5 yards per carry. Over 4 yards per carry, and then a rushing touchdown as well. So you got the productivity here. It was a favorable matchup. He made the most of it. Jamal Williams actually scored an early touchdown. I was like, yep, here we go. This is the Jamal Williams show. And then boom, bang, bop, here comes DeAndre Swift roaring right back into it. So right as things had seemed to get clear and we knew it was the Jamal Williams train heading forward the rest of the season, now we're going to have this dialogue for the coming weeks about which guy you start, if you start both of them, all this BS that is just going to be an absolute fantasy headache. So rest in peace, my sanity here for the rest of this NFL season. Deshaun Watson, talking through a matchup where we had kind of talked in the comment section to some subscribers and people asking questions throughout the week, is that we were kind of avoiding Deshaun Watson in this game. Really, the two Cleveland Browns that I was really looking to start here in Week 13 were Amari Cooper, which obviously was so-so this week, and then you had Nick Chubb, of course, who you were sit and forget type player that we actually expected to have a much bigger game than he did against Houston. Obviously had 80 rushing yards but didn't score a touchdown. So for Deshaun Watson, the bottom line takeaway here is that we just have to be patient with him. The guy hasn't played football in 700 plus days. It was an ugly performance. He got absolutely carried by the special teams and defense, but it was kind of to be expected here. It's a new offense. It's a new team. It's new personnel. It's not like he's been practicing with these guys throughout the season. I believe his suspension applied to the practice field as well. He wasn't able to practice until like the week 12 bye or whatever. He had an 11-game suspension, came back here in week 13. So at the end of the day, it is an unfortunate scenario. Hopefully not too many of you guys actually started him this week. We had him outside of our top 12 in this week's rankings. I believe he's my QB 15, and I'm sure he actually finished well below that marker. So, Deshaun Watson, patience here. Might give him another week before I even contemplate starting him. James Cook leading the way in the Buffalo Bills changing dynamic in the running back room. So essentially, it was a 44% snap share for Devin Singletary. It was a 43% snap share for James Cook. James Cook was the more productive player. He seems to have, in the past few weeks here, been accruing more and more meaningful snaps. And what I mean by that is the snap count percentage hasn't necessarily risen dramatically until this week. Rather, his involvement in key situations and downs of the game have. You really can only see this by simply turning on the game and actually watching his role in this offense grow. And I think we're starting to get to a turning point here where he may actually become this team's lead horse. So does that mean that he's a workhorse? Not necessarily. Does that mean that he becomes an uber relevant fantasy player? Also not necessarily, but what it does mean is that Devin Singletary's value could be pushed downwards here. James Cook's value could be pushed upwards here. And that Nyheim Hines trade seems to kind of make his fantasy stock a little bit obsolete here, as his role in the offense just hasn't ever really materialized since that trade deadline move. So for Cook, it was 100 plus scrimmage yards. It was 20 opportunities, 14 in the run game, 6 in the receiving game. It was 15 opportunities for Devin Singletary. So obviously 5 more looks for James Cook, who got 100% of his targets this week as well. Garrett Wilson, our next takeaway here, number 5, is that he may just be a must-start player for the rest of this fantasy season. He has the luxury of a very favorable closing schedule here, which gets kicked off with Detroit this week, a defense that has really struggled in their pass game. Even Christian Kirk went over 100 yards in this week's matchup against Jacksonville. Garrett Wilson is far more talented. He's more athletic. He is a better route runner. He does everything so well. This is such an elite player. I kind of called him, baby Devontae coming into this year's draft class. He's a smaller target, obviously, not nearly as large as Devontae Adams, hence the name Baby Devontae, and he's younger. But his routes are absolutely filthy. His footwork is nasty, and this guy is just such a dang good prospect. That's why he's the 10th overall pick in this draft. And Mike White is getting this dude the rock. So he's coming off of 8 receptions on 15 freaking targets. Public service announcement here, be freaking patient with your rookie wide receivers. Every year, I pound the draft button on these guys, and even when they stink up the first 2/3 of my season, I leave them on my bench because you get guys coming out late in the stretch runs of your seasons having numbers like Christian Watson's having right now and Garrett Wilson. These guys turn into league-winning players, a video we just talked about last week with both of these names included. So, again, 15 freaking targets, 8 receptions, 162 freaking yards. I believe this guy already has 3 or 4 AFC Offensive Rookie of the Week awards. He's probably closing in on that next one here. And then he's also, the game prior to this, he had a 5-reception game on 8 targets for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns against Chicago. And again, has favorable matchups here going forward down the stretch run. So, as long as Mike White's at quarterback, I expect the ball to be delivered with relative precision. Jeff Wilson Jr. here, running back, Miami Dolphins. He's no longer a San Francisco 49er, despite what the incorrect, abbreviation may say on your screen right now. The takeaway here is that this backfield just once again became a blurred disaster. So obviously we had, the era of Raheem Mostert, the days when it looked like he was going to be an RB2 going forward the rest of the season. Then you had the trade deadline move, where immediately Jeff Wilson Jr. took over the priority touches of this backfield. And then now, after Raheem Mostert returns from his minor hiatus due to injury, he comes out and there's 8 total touches allotted to these players for 33 total yards. 1 of them for 3 yards was Jeff Wilson Jr. 7 of them for 30 yards were Raheem Mostert. So This backfield, again, like that Lions backfield, became a little bit of a headache. I'm interested to hear here. I've scoured the internet and different fantasy apps looking for some sort of injury designation or some sort of pertinent news that would, point my hand in the direction of why the hell this backfield turned out the way it did. I mean, they couldn't block anything in Miami, and we're actually going to have a closing point today talking about Miami and kind of what fell apart and what went wrong for them against San Francisco. But man, this definitely makes things going forward a bit tougher because Jeff Wilson Jr. was starting to get in the elite running back 2 discussion and conversation, and now this clouds my judgment and my views of him a little bit here, as I'm sure it does for you guys as well. So by any means, if someone has peeked across information that I haven't yet seen and obviously can't contribute to this video at this time, again, as I record this at halftime of Sunday Night Football on Sunday evening, make sure to chip that in, and I will be happy to add on to your thoughts and comments here. Jamar Chase, this is a real simple one here. He's back, baby. 7 receptions on 8 targets, 97 yards, and the game-clinching first down reception on a bubble screen route. He basically just bulldogged his way. He broke 2 tackles and then stretched across the plane for that 5th yard there on 3rd and 5. But I was incredibly excited to see this. They worked the entire field with him. No, it wasn't a crazy performance. It wasn't awesome statistically. 97 yards are really good, but obviously just 7 catches. Again, this is like me being extremely nitpicky here, the fact that he didn't have a touchdown or a super big catch or anything like that. But Joe Burrow was throwing him fade routes. He was throwing him stop routes, comebacks, slant routes. The whole repertoire was on display for Jamar Chase here. So that was all, of course, encouraging to see for his fantasy stock. I think he'll pick a right up where he left off as a top 5 receiver going forward, especially with his closing playoff schedule of Cleveland, at Tampa Bay, at New England, Buffalo, and Baltimore here down the stretch of this season. Jimmy Garoppolo, unfortunate stuff here. So Jimmy G is the second 49ers quarterback for a team that had 2 really solid starters heading into the season, potential starters, I should say, are now down to Brock Purdy, who might possibly be one of the worst starting quarterbacks that I've seen in the league this year. Now, he wasn't totally, abysmal in this game. Now, I will kind of shit on him for a second here because his efficiency was terrible. But in previous stints where we've seen him in the lineup for this team, he has, let's say, turned the wrong direction on run plays. He has thrown some of the most blasphemous interceptions I've seen all year. I am gravely concerned for the stock of 49ers pass catchers, starting with Brandon Ayuk first and foremost, because I've had my gripes with Brandon throughout this season because I just couldn't believe that he continually scored touchdowns and consistent production for as long as he did. This is unfortunate and sucks for Brandon because it's obviously a huge hit to his stock. You had a guy in Jimmy who was an elite ball distributor and could effectively get the football in, windows, 20-yard crossing routes, out routes, deep crossers. All that stuff was on the table for Ayuk in that elite route running. I'm not really sure if that's the case anymore here. So sucks for him. Deebo Samuel, how will this impact him? A guy who's been banged up throughout the course of the season. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it means more freebies at the line of scrimmage. I think Christian McCaffrey is probably the biggest beneficiary here, but this offense can't move the ball. It's going to hurt everyone regardless. So a lot of stuff to break down in the next month or so for this 49ers offense. I'm extremely disappointed because this team was incredibly exciting to watch, and obviously their efforts to go out and win a Super Bowl this year, I would be absolutely shell-shocked if that came to fruition now, seeing, again, Brock Purdy, a guy who I have little to no respect for as an NFL and especially fantasy football quarterback here going forward. Last up here. Actually, this is not last up. It is supposed to be last up. We've actually got one more point after this. That's fine. I'll keep it in the order that we are currently heading here. But Tua Tagovailoa talking through this Dolphins offense. So there's been discussions here. Is Tua the Dolphins MVP? Is Tyreek Hill the Miami Dolphins team MVP? Not that I think that this player is this team's offensive MVP, but I think he's their unsung hero, the guy who does the dirty work for this team and doesn't really get the credit that's due, because I think that a lot of the opportunities for downfield passing game looks to Tyreek and to Jalen Waddle, obviously setting up Tua for his own statistical success. Wow, that was a tongue twister there for me for some reason, is because of this player, and that player is Teron Armstead. And Teron Armstead was not in the lineup for this game. Their stud offensive tackle who really buys this team more time to take shots downfield. He is, of course, very good in the run game as well. In his absence, I was going to say his presence, but his absence was incredibly felt in this 49ers matchup. Now, Miami is not facing a defensive front seven like this 49ers group every single week, so it's not the biggest concern or deal in the world here, but it is worth noting that when Teron Armstead is not in the lineup, this impacts this team and playmakers such as Jalen Waddle, who, yes, I know he was dinged up and was very much so less than 100% in this game, but he had one catch for 9 yards, and I think a lot of that has to do with, aside from 2 plays, this offense was stymied. I already talked about how crappy the run game was in this matchup. Aside from an RPO on the first play of the game, a crossing route, at least it looked like an RPO to me, was Trent Sherfield that went for 75 yards and a house call because of his run after catch. That's one big play. And then the other was a hookup with Tyreek Hill on what was actually one of the better deep balls I've seen Tua throw all year, and was incredibly impressed by. So again, Teron Armstead's absence or presence in this lineup is a huge deal to the things that this team does offensively. I did touch on this, I believe, as well earlier in this episode. If I didn't, it was in the waiver video. Tua did sustain an ankle injury, so hopefully he's available for the next game here for the Miami Dolphins. But at the end of the day, I just did want to talk about that situation because it clearly had massive impacts in the run game and obviously the pass game for this team that really struggled here this week. And then Zonovan Knight. This is actually just kind of me taking responsibility here on a take that I wish I would have, approached a little bit differently last week. So Zonovan Knight, to me, is simply the lead back for this Jets team until further notice, and that notice being when Michael Carter returns. Now, that very much could be here in Week 14, where we see him get healthy and recover from that ankle sprain and be ready to go here. But at the end of the day, it is a situation where I thought it would be a heavy running back by committee style approach. I thought we'd see more B-Rob. I thought that Ty Johnson would be more involved here. And it was clearly Zonovan Knight's work to be had here. 15 rushing attempts, 90 yards on the ground. Could have had a touchdown or 2, but ended up he got stuffed. Let's just say that. So for Zonovan, he is a extremely low RB2 in standard formats to a low end flex in any PPR league. He wasn't really too involved in that phase here, but he did look decent on the ground. He did have an inflated stat total from a 41-yard rush late in that contest. So putting all this stuff into context here, but of course, these are my takeaways from this week's games, and of course, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. 10 of them, as a matter of fact, from this week's Week 13 outings and slate here. So as we progress into Week 14, again, as always, if you're new around here, it would mean a ton to me to smash that subscribe button, turn the bell on, so you're never late for a new piece of content like I talked about and touched on here. Our waiver episode is live right now as well, so make sure to check that one out after you're done watching this episode, and I will see you in a future video here. Peace out.